don't rush you guys, but I know I started a bit late today. Yeah, I am super excited to be introducing two of my friends here from Austin, Rachel Manning and Shane Johnson. They work with different groups here in Austin. Shane, the one I'm going to highlight particularly is Austin Justice Coalition. They've been having some awesome events throughout the week. If any of you made it out to them, thank you. If you haven't seen Black Panther, go, it's great. And then Rachel from USA, which is Undoing White Supremacy. I think they can articulate a bit better kind of what their individual backgrounds are, so I'm gonna let them kind of explain that. But really, the purpose of this is, you know, we live in a certain part of Austin, and that comes with a bit of insularity that I would like us to start breaking out of and really start taking an active and proactive approach to kind of reaching out beyond what is like our little bubble. So with that, Rachel and Shane, would you like to? Yeah.
Can you guys hear me from right here?
Yeah.
I want to make sure that if anyone has difficulty hearing, I'm not excluding them, but I will be a lot more comfortable if I talk right here.
I can see on my thing then.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Jordan, for having us here. I'm really pleased to be here with Shane today. My name is Rachel Manning. I'm an organizer with Undoing White Supremacy Austin. We are a local group of primarily white people who organize against systemic and institutional racism very locally, kind of hyper locally, just in Austin. And we have been around in one form or another since 2013. We're a local chapter of a national organization called Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is also a network of white people who are organizing in accountable relationships with communities of color that are organizing for racial justice. Shane, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, Shane. I use he, him pronouns, which I think is important to say that explicitly, to acknowledge that there are a lot of transgender or queer people who don't necessarily use the pronouns that they appear to. So I'm involved with a lot of stuff. I'm a native Austinite, born and grew up around or in and near Austin, near North Austin my whole life. And moved back recently, but I'm involved with Austin Justice Coalition, which is, again, a mostly Black-led organization for addressing, fighting different social injustices, and a lot of what we do is developing better policy with regard to policing and accountability, but also we advocate at the state legislature as well. I'm also involved with Indivisible Austin, which is predominantly a civic engagement related organization. Early voting starts on Tuesday and goes to the following Friday. Woo! Election day is March 6th. Go vote. I'm also involved. My background has been more in environmental organizing. I've been doing that since high school. And I'm involved with a group called the Austin Environmental Justice Team, as well as a host of other organizations. So, which I think is a decent indicator of how all of these different issues are really interconnected. Like I can't possibly decide, me personally, to decide to only be involved in one organization. And then I volunteer for other organizations as well.
Can you give me when are we supposed to be wrapping this up?
Do 20.
20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to put this here so that I have an idea of where we are. So when Shane and Jordan and I were talking about what we wanted to talk about here today, we had a couple long kind of drawn out conversations about how to approach a conversation about race in Austin during Black History Month in a group that maybe doesn't have a ton of Black folks in it. So we talked about a whole bunch of different ways, but there were, and out of that came sort of a plan to talk a little bit about the lay of the land. So maybe some of the history of how race has been mechanized in Austin. And so I'm going to go into that a little bit, and then Shane's going to talk a little bit about how that relates to where we are right now, and a little bit about community organizing, and then we'd love to take some time to do some questions afterwards, and then we can take it wherever the group wants to go. We've got some slides that will help us paint a little bit of a picture. So I'm going to do a little bit of a story about Austin. So if we go to the next slide, so this is a draft of the city plan from 1928. 1928 was when 1928 was when the first city plan of Austin was created, and this forms kind of like the next. This is the foundation for city planning in Austin. What's important about this plan is this is legalized segregation. What happened with this, literally? So what they did with this plan was they decided, this company, Koch and Fowler, decided that services for non-white people would be east of East Avenue, which is current I-35, and services for anyone who was white would be provided on the west side of East Avenue. So this meant schools, water services. There was no sewer or anything like that, but electricity in 1928, probably not. I mean, I don't know, but a little bit, but probably not in East Austin, right? This also meant roads, right? Roads would be paved in West Austin, but not in East Austin. So this is the first plan, right? So if we go to the next slide, this meant that by 1940, the blue dots are white folks, the purple dots are black folks, right? What this essentially did was it moved, literally, brick by brick, stone by stone, any non-white person who was in the rest of the city over to East Austin in order to be able to do simple things like send their children to school. At this point, I-35 has not yet been built. This is still East Avenue, the red line down the middle. This also, during the 1940s, is when we saw the beginning of redlining, which basically was mortgage classifications, which denied mortgages to people who were in high-risk zones, and this was primarily in East Austin, almost exclusively. Exclusively in East Austin. So if we go to the next one, we're going by decades because this is a survey. In 1956, East Austin almost elected an African-American community leader to the city council, which, and so the reaction was that we changed the city council structure from a place-based system, from the normal system to an at-large system, which basically ensured an all-white city government for the next 50 years until we readopted the 10-1 council. So, and we can see, like the segregation is still really continuing here. So if we go to the next one, in 1968, MOPAC was built, which displaced the rest of the Black residents who were in Clarksville. Clarksville was originally a freedmen's town. There were, the roads weren't paved, there was no water because the city wouldn't provide those things over there. But this, basically building this through, solidified the segregation. There's this horrific story about a church of, the Black Church of Clarksville being literally, taken apart board by board and then rebuilt over in East Austin. So if we go to the next one. Very, very soon after that, I believe it was 1971, Clarksville was designated historic, and they started a revitalization program, basically 1970s gentrification, which paved all the streets, which now no longer had any Black folks in them. So that was basically the whitewashing of Clarksville, and this really the solidification of East Austin as the Black section of Austin. So if we go to the next one. Okay, we're changing, this is a little bit of this isn't a land use slide, although it is a land use slide because we can still see the map, right? Segregation is still very, very real. This is in 1983. Did anyone live here in 1983? Do you remember the KKK march in 1983? No. Yeah. So this was actually they were given a city permit. blocked it out, possibly. So this was on February 19th, 1983. The KKK had a permanent march in Austin. This is basically, proof that racism doesn't die; it just shifts and changes form. So if we go to the next one, this one's a little more hopeful. Well, maybe. So in 1993, HODER, People Organized for the Defense of Earth and Her Resources, which is an organization that still exists today, began organizing in East Austin against the tank farms, against the Holly Street Power Plant, against there was a landfill, and so they organized to shut all of these things down. HODER was incredibly powerful. What happened right after that is the city rezoned the east side, and in 1998 they passed the Smart Growth Initiative, which slated all of East Austin for intensive development. So if we go to the next one, throughout the early 2000s, the displacement in East Austin is not as extreme as what we're seeing today. We've got two kind of notes. There was a major police contract negotiation during the year 2001, which was just over, which has been continuously organized, like renewed over the last 17 years. Although the police union was so strong during that negotiation process that the activists who were organizing for that asked them not to pass it at the end because the contract was so bad. Just a year later, Sophia King was shot in East Austin by the APD as it was suicide by cop is what they call it, but she was shot and there was never any recourse for that. So clearly police transparency initiatives not working so well. And then the next and last slide. So we can see the difference in the Black population here, right? As rents have continued to rise in East Austin, there has been massive displacement. And then in 2015, there was the destruction of Jump Lane, literally for a South by Southwest party. It was demolished, and overnight there was. Jump Lane was a pinata store on Cesar Chavez, and without any warning, it was literally destroyed without the owners, without the renters' knowledge. They were there one night, they locked up, and the next day it was gone. Literally for the purposes of holding a South by Southwest party. So what I was trying to share in this very quick and actually very hurried, painful recounting is that racism is a system that morphs. And it is weaponized in different ways. It shifts over time. And so the historic destruction of Clarksville is intricately connected to the destruction of East Austin. I think when I do this, it's in order to get a better feel of our city, right? And so what is the history of our city and of the land that we're standing on? And how does that like make us, how does that call us into some sort of sense of responsibility for what happens around us? This is our city. This is that we have ownership over this. I think we've got a next slide. So I'm going to pass this over to Shane after all of that and let him do the upbeat part. But I really look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Again, Shane, you pronouns. Yeah, so I've learned in presentation classes to engage the audience. So quick activity, assuming you can, the ability to raise your arms. Who here feels a little sad or that was kind of depressing? Who here wants to do something about it? You can also jump out of your seat if you really want. Cool. So, yes.
I think that's actually places we don't necessarily have data for. Yeah. So, like, I wouldn't be able to tell you necessarily what is in those places.
And yeah, some of it will be like development or that isn't residential, you know. and a big area was UT. So yeah, but there's definitely a lot.
There are a lot more maps like that. If you're interested in kind of demographic maps, there's actually a wonderful professor at UT named Eric Tang who's done really, really remarkable research on race and land use in Austin.
But yeah, so I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what can we do. Like, it's great to learn this information and learn about issues, but learning about issues doesn't really matter that much if all you do is learn about them, you know? So what can we do about this? What are actions we can take? What are next steps? And like, why is it important to do next steps and to take some sort of action? Kind of like how Jordan was saying earlier, of like, she got a lot of feedback about Oasis and wanting to have like more outside events, more engagement with other communities or around other issues. So that's kind of what my background is in, and then I want to help take y'all along or guide you along a journey of engaging with that. So let's just go to the next slide.
There's another slide. Hold on. Sorry.
That's okay.
I thought that was the last slide.
No, we got a couple more.
Never mind.
I see it's frozen.
It is frozen.
But yeah, so so my background is in community organizing in a lot of ways. It's also called grassroots organizing. But basically what that is taking, well, it's, so there's lots of jargon and terminology out there, but there's kind of a couple of phrases that are pretty common are community organizing and mobilization. So mobilization is kind of getting people aware of issues, getting people to turn out to events or rallies or things like that. But for activists, what we do more so and what we strive for is community organizing. And organizing being that people are organized in an effective way to where they can mobilize consistently. They recognize and understand the power that they have as people who come together, and that they can use that power to affect social change. So, and grassroots organizing, the word grassroots kind of has to do with, there's, you know, the roots of a large group or movement are lots of different individuals. But anyway, so, and I'll take a step back 1 second to just say that some of y'all folks might be wondering, well, why is community organizing important? Like I go out and vote, so I'm doing my act of people power. And this is a conversation I have with my dad more and more frequently now. But going out and voting is absolutely essential, and it's a foundational thing you do. But you don't have people power 1 day a year, or a few days a year, the primary, a couple other elections. You have people power every single day. And like, I've been at City Hall numerous times in the past year, and City Council and the city manager or the mayor, they have decided to do things specifically because 50 people showed up and made some noise. And because that made them realize that, wait a minute, this is a serious issue, and we actually haven't been listening to the people that we are charged with representing. And so there are a lot of systems in place, like Rachel was talking about. There's systems of racism, also called institutional racism, and the mayor has a task force on this. But to really inform those things, you have to be connected to and listening to the people that are impacted by those. And so you really need the most impacted people and their allies to be organized in an effective way, and then to turn out in a way that utilizes their political and people power. So I was talking to Jordan one time when we were kind of planning this, a very long phone call. I just ranted on and on about another phrase in grassroots organizing. Our lexicon is levels of engagement. And so that's kind of where different people are at in terms of being engaged, or being civically engaged, or being engaged, understanding their political power and thinking about or actively using it. So typically, I divide it in about 5 it doesn't really matter to some extent how many facts and statistics you have about an issue. If you don't have a personal connection to someone who's impacted, it's fundamentally different. So that's an important foundational thing, but it's also, if every single person in the world only read about issues and didn't do anything about it, no good social change would happen. So the next level, would be kind of going out to an event. Maybe you hear about a rally, you're like, yeah, I want to show up, and you listen in the audience, you're all fired up and pumped about it. Next one would be kind of consistently showing up to events over and over again, maybe to a broader array of issues, and then also being a very kind of a micro-organizer of, I just made that up, that term, micro-organizer of like bringing out your friends and being to an event and saying, hey, we all really need to go to this. And you'll often hear people who organize events say, next time bring a friend, because that can be a very effective means of getting more people out there. And then I would say the next level is getting people involved in planning or organizing events or helping publicize some of the back end stuff. And then the ultimate level naturally would be to be in it very heavily involved in some sort of organization or the leadership that is going into planning events. And I, in some conversations I've had with other friends who are pretty experienced and community organizers who have been around a long time, we've recently all kind of come to the conclusion that there's a lot of kind of 1 through 3, and then there's a lot of like 4 and 5. But it's important to, as much as you can, move people along the levels or move them up the ladder, if you will. And there doesn't seem to be enough of like moving people from showing up to running out of time to really getting a little bit more involved. And of course, not everyone can, or it isn't necessarily their calling to be organizing events or organizing around issues. And then the other side of this is called the spectrum of allies, and that's more of like a an analysis tool for organizing or political engagement. And it's often you want to think about, if you're trying to, you identify an issue, you want to affect social change. So you're going to, in some way, get a lot of people out to some sort of event or to pressure elected officials. And ultimately that's so, community organizing and engagement or mobilization is so powerful because at the most fundamental level, elected officials are accountable to their constituents. Even some of our really terrible ones who are sold out and only listen to their donors, at some point they really show or say things along the lines of like, that they change their mind or they really convey that like they can't do something or they will do something because their voters say so. And ultimately, that's the most powerful leverage that people have over someone, is to say, we will replace you if you don't do a better job. But it can be important for mobilizing people and getting people aware and organized around an issue to say, who is really our active opposition, who are our passive opposition, who are neutral, so they can be possibly, and neutral would probably be people who are in the kind of 1 on levels of engagement, or maybe 2 go to an event, but they haven't really formed their opinion yet. And then passive allies might be like 2 or 3 going to events, and then active allies, they might still be people doing armchair activism, but they also, there's different, it's important to figure out where people are at and to then develop your strategy around affecting some change around some issue. So go to the next slide. Yeah, there's, in terms of, I think, really couching this in an effective way, this is a quote by James Baldwin saying, "The great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. History is not the past, it is the present," as he says very eloquent, or he's quoted eloquently in I Am Not Your Negro. So I think I'll just say 2 things about this. One is that in order to really understand an issue effectively, we have to understand where it came from and sort of the roots of the problem, which are the history, as well as how all of us have our own personal worldview, and that's largely informed by our lived experiences and what we know about has already happened. It's important to understand more and more of the history, which often has specifically not been taught to us to keep us ignorant of our people power and how we can fight to change society if we really know we can and decide to. And then I'll also tie that into when I first walked in and saw one of the core values, reality is known through reason. I thought, like, I totally agree with what I presume is the motivation for this, and at face value, I think it's good. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the reality that each of us lived is informed by our own lived experiences and informed by what we know of the past. And I think as we open up ourselves to more and more, or say if we get to know people personally impacted by a different issue, and then we get to know the history around that issue, it fundamentally does change our worldview and in essence, our reality at some point. And I think I've done ranting now. But yeah, we do have one more slide of kind of this events coming up. Cool.
We can keep that up there.
Yeah.
I think there was just one thing that, well, no, I mean, I guess we wanted to open it up to questions. We gave you just a ton of information to us about like how to organize and about kind of like how we got to where we are. What we haven't really given you is where we are now, which I think we can kind of talk about. If there's anything that anyone wanted to bring up now, or we could kind of talk about the current campaigns that are being kind of pushed by directly impacted people, and in this case, we're talking about people of color who are organizing in their own communities against systemic oppression and all sorts of systemic violence and whatever issues are impacting them. So, do we usually do a stack or something? I mean, how? Okay. Sure.
Here on economics, and of course, leads to including economics. Right? So there's a lot of tax dollars on it's there for the organization that's financial aspects.
Yes. So that's actually, do you have anything to talk about?
Yeah.
So I think that it's a conversation that is happening. There isn't a specific organization. There's because what the slides, I think if we translate the slides, we can see how all of these things impact finances, right? Like both community level finances, group level finances, and also individual family level finances. We can all kind of trace where our families had or did not have money from specific policies. There are groups that talk about these in different sections, like as it relates to different issues. So the conversation about affordability and housing right now, when it's being held at the community level, is deeply shaped by that, deeply informed by that historical knowledge of how you either did or did not have access to financial to wealth. I wouldn't say there's one group looking at it overall, but it is very, very tied to how we have these conversations. And there are groups who are kind of low-key talking about reparations, but it's a hard thing.
Yeah, I would add that it's race, economic. So, economic policy is intimately tied to and informed by historic racism. There's economic policy throughout the past, through to the present, as well as racism being informed by economic policy, as Rachel was saying, like being displaced and being denied services for decades, sometimes still even today in Austin, based on the color of your skin, like that it is both an issue of race and it is both an economic issue. Likewise, redlining, as Rachel touched on, which was the explicitly federally legalized practice of discriminating bank loans based on your race, and then justifying it by demarcating areas as high risk on maps and with red lines. But all of those high risk areas were only workable. So it was, and that practice throughout, I believe it began in the 1910s or 20s, but it was really, it happened for decades, and that process locked out mostly Black families, but all families of color for decades of having access to equity and loans or a mortgage, and thus accumulating wealth. So there's lots of statistics that show that I think it was a white family where the parents don't have college degrees on average have 13 times the wealth of Black families that do have college degrees.
And that's even different from the income versus wealth.
Yeah.
So I think it was a study that came that was out of an article in the Boston Globe sometime in the last couple of years, did an analysis on white versus Black families and wealth accumulation, and you can see the income, which is that's your annual income. So if you look at wealth income, which is the accumulation of money over the course of a lifetime, the results are it's hundreds. White families have access to hundreds of times wealth as Black. Okay. So on a policy level, right, it's so huge, right? How do we even begin to have a conversation about that? I wouldn't say there's a group talking about it, but I would say it's woven into a lot of the conversations that are happening.
Yeah, including that was under my supremacy Austin and AJC's policy school. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of on that note, I'm curious about the policy strategy moving forward, especially dealing with East Austin. And I really appreciate you kind of going through how historical policy has led us to this point. And I was just kind of thinking about okay, if I was the mayor, how would I try to deal with this? And it's really difficult because, for example, if you try to limit development to limit gentrification, you then run the risk of just creating a depressed Black zone in East Austin as a result. And that seems like kind of equally bad outcome as the direction we're moving now. So I'm just kind of curious about if we wanted to limit the impact of the direction Austin's going with a lot of wealth coming in from outside and all of that, and limit the impact on people of color and other Native Austinites who maybe were here prior to this. What's kind of the policy strategy there?
There are lots. I want to keep these brief because I'd like to be able to talk about them. So
I know.
So honestly, the quickest answer I can give you was there are a couple different groups doing really amazing anti-gentrification and anti-displacement work, and that is coming out of indigenous, and by indigenous I mean historically local communities. My particular the group that I'm doing White Supremacy Austin is working with very closely is called the Eastern Crescent Right to Stay Coalition. It's a group of it's mostly Latino led, I'm fairly sure, but they're definitely it's all people of color led. It's a coalition of a bunch of different groups, and they are organizing in the Eastern Crescent, which is basically from Montopolis up around the outside of East Austin. outside of Eastern Inner Austin. And they have an amazing analysis, and I would encourage you to read what they're doing and follow them on social media and see when their next events are, because supporting that work is the difference between the mayor telling us what we're going to do and possibly screwing that up, and us actually creating a different approach that maybe does work.
Thanks for that approach. Yeah, sorry. Thanks for the approach. So you give us a lot of historical injustices that really sad about what happens in us. And I would understand that they will cast a shadow for like consequences to people living till today. But when you talk about institutional racism, like I want to know, are there current policies that actually affect people, like policies that are designed to be racist, like the ones you showed like in 1920 or something? Because how I understand, I'm from Egypt. How I understand America's work nowadays is like the free market. So the only color the system sees is green. That's all of it. If you are not green, the system doesn't see you. It's not the optimal, but at least not racist about white and black. So like how much of the current policy is racist in itself, and how much of it is just like the consequences of this total racism? But yes.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so in terms of institutional racism today and the importance of understanding past or historical policies, I think it, there's a lot of talk about America being or there's a lot of laws and policy in the U.S. that say like everyone has equal rights. Everyone has equal rights under the law. You can do whatever you want, assuming it's illegal. In that sense, there's a lot of free market policy, with the exception of, there's a lot more laws nowadays that say like this, if a business operates in a way that's explicitly racist, you can't do that. We're gonna literally consequences for you. But what I would say is that because of, the historic racism and economic opportunities denied to people of color, even more so Black folks specifically, people nowadays, they don't start off at an equal footing. And so a colorblind system like our financial institutions, which are mostly colorblind, there have been, like the housing bubble, there was a lot of explicitly racist policy happening behind the scenes. Like from a fairly high level Wells Fargo, there's like transcripts and quotes of high up people saying racist things and telling employees to do racist things. But what I'd say is that a colorblind institution like our economics system, when it doesn't take into account the disparities that are due to race, like the fact that Black folks and people of color don't have as much money, and it says, it's basically saying you all can do whatever you want, assuming you have the money. And so Black folks and people of color don't have the money because of the history of racism. And so that in itself is institutional racism. Economic policy or institutions essentially perpetuate the same disadvantage by saying, hey, Black folks, you can do it just as much as the white folks, assuming you have the money, but the Black folks don't have the money. And that's kind of what institutional racism is by definition, is there doesn't need to be intent whatsoever for it to continue racist practices, assuming that it doesn't make up for discrepancies. And a free market by definition, businesses on an individual level most of them will not have economic, or will not implement policies that will take into account racial historic disparities, because it's not going to maximize their profit.
You're talking about an equality lens, and in racial justice, we talk about an equity lens, which is not you're talking about the equality of input, and we're talking about the equality of output, right? And so what do we need to do in order to make sure that everyone ends up equal rather than starts equal? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes some sense.
Okay, and then the other thing is all institutions have actors. Yes, the color of the, yes, everyone is but there are actors, in these systems, and we all have what's called implicit bias. That's basically baked into us. It's we like to say it's the water we swim in, it's the air we breathe in. And I'd be happy to talk about it more. I want to make sure that Dave had a question or someone, but like you're asking a really, really important question, and it's a question that I think we all need to be having about what kind of equality are we looking for.
Okay, so you two are the speakers for the day for this this talk on Black history or what happened back then. And it was curious that you asked a question, someone asked a question about 1983. Anybody remember the case? KKT to come here and speak, or were they afraid to come here, or?
So that, in terms of, and I'm very engaged in the community. Yeah, no, I'm not saying that to like criticize you. I'm just saying that I did reach out a lot, and we had a lot of conversations. But the leadership of Black-led organizations, the Black communities, is very, very busy. Like, you know, calendar booked up for the entire month of February, working mostly with the mayor and city council members. So the folks who could have come speak here today are either at City Hall or, you know, doing other things, unfortunately. So that's a good question.
Can I respond to that? Okay, so I work with a group that is white people talking to white people about racism. And I can see where you would find that to be curious. One of the things that is one of the instructions from leadership and activists of color, particularly in terms of racial justice, is that white people do have a responsibility to talk to our own people. I feel like I have a responsibility to educate my own community about what I have learned in my work, in my education. And so I have the ability to come sit here and say, here are historical facts.
It's all well and good, but I'm talking to white people all the time. That's my circle of friends. And so it's not like this is anything new. It's still white telling each other how to behave.
It is. No,
I just wish we could have had someone else.
That's, well, Shane is like.
Shane, you never felt more white.
Yes, I actually have.
But so here's my thing. White people don't talk to each other about race. It's not something we do. I think it's something really, really important, and it's something I strive to do, to have conversations about race in white-only rooms. Because trust me, people of color have conversations about race in their rooms. But I never had a conversation about, my first conversation about race, I was 19 years old. I grew up in Oregon, so maybe that's got something to do with it, but it took me 20 years to have a conversation about race. That is a problem, because what it creates is a profound discomfort in white people in having this conversation. And so practicing is good. Even if it doesn't, there's no reason why you can't have a conversation about race with other white people. We have race too.
Go ahead quickly. Yeah. I think part of it is, you don't have to be a person of color in order to talk about it. I think sometimes white people think that, like, oh, well, I'm not someone of color, so I shouldn't say anything.
Right,
but everyone should say something. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And it is a bit of a balancing act here. I just want to speak on behalf of the community, but like, we are white. Most of us are white. We live in East Austin is white. So quite frankly, like, I've been going to Austin Justice Coalition events because I did understand the importance of, like, if we are going to be talking about these issues, I do want to make sure that it is informed by people of that community. And I don't want this to either, like, to be a thing where, Shane isn't Black enough to talk about it, right? Because that's
I know that wasn't the intent.
But in case that is something that's maybe like some feeling, or it is hard, believe it or not. Like, I made a joke, like when I went to go see Black Panther, we went in and he's like, "Oh, yeah, there were Black people in Austin," right?
Because it is hard. Like they're really segregated, and it is difficult to get that kind of interaction with people in communities. I know I've heard a long time, but like that's just something I want you to know. Like this is a work in progress, and yes, this is an important topic to address. But it's hard. It's really hard, and I didn't want perfect to be the enemy of progress. And so just getting someone from those communities that I think represent them beautifully, I think was important. Yeah, I don't know. We do go to lunch after this, so if there's one to continue this conversation, yeah, that'd be great. Okay, unless you have additional comments.
Just on to finally, like, one thing we didn't get to talk about here was the importance of building relationships. And it's something that Jordan and Mary and Shane and I were talking about in the break, is that this work is relational. This work is based in community. This work is based in acknowledging shared humanity. And part of this work, like part of the process of undoing racism, is knowing people and acknowledging the humanity of people who are not just white, but the humanity of people who are historically classified as non-white. So like getting to that relationship building, that's really important, and that's the next step, right? When you're not in spaces that are all white, how do you build those authentic relationships? And so I feel like that's kind of how I always like to think about this work, is the process of building relationships.
And that's kind of number 2 on the level of engagement. Learning about issues, reading about them, talking about it with your friends, and then like going out somewhere else to build more relationships, a little bit more outside of the context you were in.